My name is David Sullivan. I'm a sergeant with the Seattle Police Department, and I'm the Crisis Intervention Coordinator, as well as the team leader for hostage negotiations for the city.
So what took you up to 12th and Jackson that day?
It was the events happening the day before. There were obviously a number of high-profile assaults with knives, all believed to have been committed by maybe the same person, at least per the descriptions that were provided. So what took me out of my normal role working specifically in the crisis world was a need for really proactive work to be done as much as possible within the city, and specifically at 12th and Jackson, out of fear that this person maybe would come back as they had.
And what was the first sign that something was going on?
So for me, I was sitting in the 1200 block, which is just to the east of 12th and Jackson. There's a little traffic gore point there, right in the center of the road that officers can sometimes sit in just to provide a high visibility presence. So I was sitting in that location. I was facing westbound, and I had a view of the intersection of 12th and Jackson about 150, 200 feet away. The first clue I got that something was going on was people yelling. So I was, because I was there trying to be proactive, I'm using all my senses. I have my windows down. I'm listening for whatever might be going on. I had spoken to a couple of community members earlier just that had been walking by. And so what cued me in was some kind of disturbance. I heard people yelling. And so I looked up and saw what looked like a fist fight on the corner of 12th and Jackson. Thinking it was just a fist fight, I intended, and I was alone, my intentions were to go to the intersection, turn on my siren, PA, try and let people know that the police were in the area so that they would break up the fight. As I started rolling toward the intersection, I started hearing people screaming about, "Oh, he's stabbing people, he's stabbing people." And at that point, I realized that this might be the person who was supposedly stabbing people. So my next thing was to try and figure out who he was, because everybody was saying, "Oh, he's stabbing people," and some were pointing kind of northwesterly, but there was a lot of people out there, and I really wasn't sure which one he was. So what I started to notice immediately was almost like a flock of birds, right? You've got one bird in the lead and you have a number of others following, right? That's what was happening visually for me. I saw this flock of community members that were people that hang out at 12th and Jackson that were following this suspect in a northwesterly direction. And so at that time I was at the corner of 12th and Jackson. I could see that there were injured people, but I could also see that the suspect was very nearby me. So I got on the radio. I let my fellow officers know what was happening, that I believed I was chasing the stabbing suspect. And I started driving through the crowd of people. People parted ways. They kept pointing at the same individual that they were following. So I had a pretty fair degree of confidence that I was following the right person. As I stayed in my car, because again, I was by myself. This is obviously a really serious crime. Ordinarily, we try to have multiple officers with us when we are contacting a suspect, just to keep things as de-escalated as possible. And that just wasn't possible at this point because of the severity of the crime. So I followed the suspect with my vehicle. I used it as shielding. I opened the door and I started to get out to give the man commands. And I was probably 20 or 30 feet from him. The suspect bent down quickly and then abruptly raised up and put his hands in the air. And so he started, I thought for a second he was going to surrender, But instead, he just kept his hands in the air. They were empty, and he continued walking away from me. So I followed him. I continued giving him commands. He went to the very west edge of this large parking lot that emptied onto the northern dead end of 10th Avenue. And he climbed up onto some rockery that was there. And then he went through a gap that was cut in a cyclone fence. At that point, I had to give up my shielding in front of my car. I hopped out. I climbed up the same rockery, went through the same hole in the fence, and was able to get his attention and keep his attention. I gave him instructions to get on the ground. He stopped. He actually followed my instructions. He got on the ground. And then I just paused for a minute. I let my colleagues know where I was. Shortly thereafter, two officers who had been proactively patrolling that area, Officers Weissmiller and Sprague, responded and took custody of him, took control of him. I then refocused my attention on what a man behind me was saying, which is, oh my gosh, he stabbed. And so I turned around and I found a man at the bottom of the Yesler Terrace hill climb who was on his hands and knees, face down, and had, I guessed, 6 or 7 stab wounds, very large stab wounds in his back. So I requested medical aid there. A couple of our EMT officers showed up and were well equipped to deal with it. They applied chest seals. They got him, I don't want to say stabilized, but they provided the initial care to him to prevent his lungs from collapsing. And then fire was able to come in and provide that follow-on care. So there was a lot of moving parts, as you can imagine. I mean, there was as many cops as you could possibly have in our city coming for this thing. It sounded like, from what I was hearing on the radio, that it was being well coordinated. I could tell that there were other victims that I believed were over at 12th and Jackson or in that area. They were being addressed by other SPD officers, other SPD EMTs, and ultimately by fire. And the incident commander, I heard him over the air say that this was a mass casualty incident, wanted a unified command, which is bringing fire and police together so that we're operating as one unit. And so I didn't feel like I needed to be anywhere else. And the point was, the suspect was in custody. The man who I was aware of that had been stabbed was being treated. And then I started talking to some witnesses that saw me chasing him, and they said he threw something during the pursuit. And so I used some of those community members to kind of point me into the area where they saw him throw something. And it was probably that same area, not probably, it was that same area where I had seen him dip down quickly and then raise his hands. With the help of those community members, I scoured that area and I found 2 bloody knives, one of them open. So it was my belief that he had discarded those knives there.
When you heard that mass casualty over the radio, what goes through your mind?
Just the seriousness of it, really. Mass casualty incidents are rare, but they are really what we plan for. So to hear it in real life is alarming, but it's also the fact that we have trained, that we know FEMA and we follow their guidelines is pretty comforting, because this is a terrible thing, but we know how to handle it. And so at the same time, serious, but it still inspires confidence.
Well, and on that note, you must be proud of your fellow officers. When we saw them taking immediate life-saving care on those other victims, what do you feel towards those officers who, without a second hesitation, were right in there doing the most important job, which was controlling the bleeding and saving lives? What
I will tell you is, just every day I'm proud of the people that do patrol work. Patrol work is absolutely the backbone of our department. It is the most important thing we do, period, hands down. And so I have an incredible degree of confidence in the skill level of officers who work for our department. And this is we call it King Sector, and I know those officers in King Sector, but we had people from all over the city responding to this. Yeah, I can't really express how proud I am of them, because they are they do the extra training, they voluntarily do things like EMT school. We have an incredibly talented pool of officers who are able to adapt to what's happening immediately and to provide that life-saving care. They did it in concert in this time, in concert with a lot of people that are down on their luck. A lot of people that hang out at 12th and Jackson are pretty in pretty tough circumstances. And what was inspiring to me is that we brought in the specialty skills, but we were also being assisted by those same down on their luck kind of community members, which I thought was really cool.
You mentioned earlier there was sometimes a measure of luck in police work, but here this was more than luck. I mean, you were there for a very specific reason and at the instruction of the department, saying we need to be ready if we get more stabbings up here. Yeah,
and it's a little bit funny because you always feel like that's not really going to happen, and then it happened, right? So yes, the luck part of it for me was that I was in the right place at the right time and able to impact this serious community issue. But it was, you're right. It's more than luck. It's preparation, and it's some part of just being aware of what the community needs.